Hello designers! In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a parody of the Starbucks logo. We are going to be using vector shapes, we're going to be wrapping text around a vector shape, and we're going to be using a little bit of filters to try to make our images a little bit more interesting to look at. Then we're going to export our final draft in PNG format so that you guys don't have a white background behind your logo, and it's more easily accessible to put on other places. We're going to go to Photoshop and create new, and I'm going to create a brand new document for print because I do want to print this out, but if you guys wanted to use the logo parody in some kind of online format or on social media, I'm going to show you guys how to export for that as well. For now, I'm just going to select the print preset, and then I'm going to type in my own measurements. I'm going to type in parody as my title, and my width is going to be 10 inches. Make sure it says inches, by the way. If it says pixels, it's going to be a very small document. By 10 inches. And my resolution I'm going to leave at 300, and I'm going to click create. Okay then, I want to make a very symmetrical logo, so I'm going to use my guides to help me position all of the vector shapes I'm going to be using in this document. I'm going to go to View and Guides, View and New Guide, and I'm going to type in 5 inches or 5 IN for a vertical guide, which is going to place the guide square in the center. And then I'm going to go to View and New Guide again, and I'm going to type in 5 IN or 5 inches for a horizontal guide as well. Okay, I see my layers panel seems to have disappeared. It was actually just kind of hiding collapsed in here. If your layers panel has disappeared, you're going to need to want it open because you guys are going to be working with multiple layers. So I'm just going to expand it to make my life a little bit easier as I start working with all these different layers. First things first, I'm going to use my ellipse tool, and if I go to my toolbar and count 3 up from my zoom tool, 1, 2, 3, I have my vector shapes nested here. So if I right click on the shape tools, I'll be able to find ellipse, rectangle, custom shape, and so forth. I'm just going to set it to ellipse. Now, in the options bar, the ellipse should be set to shape. Previously, we did another project where I showed you guys how to change it to pixels because we wanted to fill that selection with a gradient. But in this case, you need to make sure it's set to shape. I'm going to change the fill color to a green to match the Starbucks logo. If you guys want to, you can always check on the internet, see if you can get a hex code for the exact same green that Starbucks uses. I'm not really interested in doing that right now, so I'm just going to select any random dark forest green. And for my stroke, I'm going to set it to none. A stroke is basically an outline around the shape, but I don't want a stroke, so I set it to none. This right here, that white with a red line over it, means none. Having done that, I will now go and hold down Shift so I can drag a really symmetrical ellipse. Remember, ellipse is just a fancy name for circle. Having done that, I'm now going to position the ellipse straight in the middle of my document. Okay, perfect. You know what? I don't want these guides to move because I might accidentally move them like this. So to avoid that, I'm going to go to View and Lock Guides because I don't want them to move. I don't want to accidentally move them out of the way and then I have to position them again. Okay, having done that, I will now go and make a duplicate of this ellipse. And in fact, I'm just going to call it green circle in the options, not in the options bar, in the layers panel, just so that it makes it easier for me to identify what layer it is. And I'm going to make a duplicate of this layer by hitting Ctrl J on my keyboard, and you'll see basically that it's a duplicate of that same exact circle. I'm going to position it back in place, and what I want to do with this duplicate is I want to go back to my shape tool, and in the options bar with my shape tool selected, I'm going to set select the fill to none, and I'm going to change the stroke color to white, and I'm going to increase the stroke and make it pretty thick. I'm going to set it to about 50 pixels. You guys can eyeball it based on how thick you want that stroke to be, but I'm going to set it to 50 pixels. Now you're thinking, where is it? I can't see it, but it's here. It's just kind of like hiding. So now I kind of want that to go on the inside of the ellipse. So I'm going to use Edit and Free Transform. And I'm going to basically drag on the corners so that I can move that white ring inwards. Again, I'm trying to create basically the Starbucks logo to the best of my ability here. Technically, we wouldn't design logos using Photoshop. We'd use another program called Illustrator for that. But we're just going to experiment here. Okay, so right now the layer is called Green Circle Copy, which doesn't describe what I have in here. So I'm going to double click on the layer name and I'm going to call it White Ring. And once again, I will be using my ellipse tool, but this time I want to select a fill. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's create a new layer so that it doesn't add to this layer. So I'm going to go down at the bottom of my layers panel and click on that little plus icon to create a new layer so that when I go and use my ellipse tool, it doesn't add on to the current layers. I'm going to set the fill to black for this brand new layer, and the stroke should be set to none. And once again, I'm going to hold down Shift so I can make a really symmetrical circle. And what I want to do is I actually want to make it a little bit smaller and position it in the middle. And this is where the person's face would go. In my example, where I had put this very flattering photo of myself, I had inserted the photo inside of this black ellipse, and that's basically what I'm trying to recreate here. Now that I have the basic shapes down for my logo parody, I'm going to start creating the text. I'm going to select my type tool, which looks like a capital T, and then if I drag anywhere in my document, you'll see that my cursor will have a little box around it, and this box will basically create your typical text layer in a box format. If I drag my cursor inside the circle, you'll see that now the cursor has a circle around it, which means that the text would be contained inside the circle, but I don't want either of those things. Instead, I'm going to very carefully drag my cursor around the edge of that ellipse, the edge of that black circle, and you'll see that the cursor now is a squiggly line, and this will let me wrap text around it. Here's what I mean. So now that I see that squiggly line, I'm going to click on the edge of that ellipse, and you'll see that Photoshop will populate your document with a bunch of random text that means nothing. It's basically gibberish, but it's just a placeholder to show you what that looks like. I'm going to hit backspace so that I can write the words Bad Witch Brew instead. Needless to say, you guys will be creating your own name for this fictional coffee house. So I think that looks good so far. What I want to do is actually highlight it, and I'm going to select a new font in my font selector at the top in the options bar. So with the type tool selected, I'll be able to access all these typographic tools. And in the font selector, I'm going to look for a font I recently installed to my computer called Canyon Coffee. You guys can select any font you want, but I do suggest that you guys select a big block font. So what I want to do is I want to actually edit this text a little bit more using my character panel. And the character panel has more advanced typographic tools than I would necessarily access in my options bar. To use the character panel, I just go to Window and Character, and then I'll be able to see, let me expand it and move it aside, I'll be able to see lots of different typographic tools, from being able to change the font, to being able to change the point size, to being able to capitalize all the text, and adjust the baseline shift, which I'm going to show you guys how to do right now. I will have a far more extensive tutorial going over how to use this typographic tools in the near future. For now, we're just going to use some of the tools in the character panel. So I'm going to highlight my text, and the first thing I want to do is I want to capitalize the words. So I'm going to go in my character panel, and I'll see that there's a little option with like a double T's, and if I just kind of drag my mouse over it without clicking on it, Photoshop gives me a little note telling me what it does. So this will set it to all caps, and I want to go and set it to all caps. Then I'm just going to go and increase the size of my text just a little bit. So I think I'm going to set it to about 50 points. And now many of you guys will have it so that the text is touching the black ellipse, and we want to avoid that. Here's what I mean. So right now I had already adjusted the baseline shift. Baseline refers to the invisible line upon which letters in a block of text will sit. And if I don't highlight, you guys will see that the text is now touching that black ellipse, and I don't like that. I need there to be some space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to go right over here to this tool right here where I'm dragging my cursor, and this is going to adjust the baseline shift. And again, if you guys just drag your mouse over it, Photoshop's going to tell you in a little note what it does. And I'm going to set that to about 12 points. So I just typed in the number 12. And you can see that when I don't highlight anymore, I now have space between that black ellipse and the text, and that looks a lot cleaner and a lot more professional. So I'm going to close my character panel for the meanwhile until I'm ready to go back to it later. For right now, what I want to do is I want to move the words Bad Witch Brew to the top half of the circle, because as you can see, they're on the side. To do so, I'm going to use my path selection tool. So underneath my type tool, I have two arrow tools. One is called a path selection, and one is called a direct selection. The path selection is a black arrow, and it basically lets you move anything that's on a path. This text is on a circular path. So with the path selection tool, I'm going to go and click on the text and just kind of drag it where I want it to go. So I'm dragging it to that upper part of the circle. And I'm going to drag it just a little bit. You guys are basically eyeballing it until you can position the text where you want it to go. It's going to take you guys a few tries. Be patient until you get it how you want it to be. Okay, that took a ridiculous amount of practice, but I finally got it where I want it to go. So I'm going to leave it for a little bit. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on that outer layer of text. So what goes underneath in the bottom ellipse. To go back to my example from before, I had written the words Bat Witch Brew, and then underneath it, Wickedly Delicious Coffee underneath. So that's the text that I'm going to be working on right now. To do so, I'm going to click on the white ring layer, and then I'm going to use my type tool, and I'm going to drag my mouse to the edge of the ellipse again. So not on the inside, but on the edge of the ellipse until I see that squiggly line. Then when I see that squiggly line, I'm going to click, and Photoshop's going to add some random text for me as a placeholder, but I'm going to backspace so I don't see it anymore. And then I'm going to type up what I want. So I'm going to type up in all caps, Wickedly Good Coffee. And now you're thinking, well, I see you wrote it, but it's on the outside. So how are you going to flip it inwards? And this is where we're going to be using our path selection tool again. And I know it does take some practice using this tool, but be patient. I'm going to flip over to my path selection tool, and I'm basically going to click on the text with my path selection tool and drag it inwards. Okay, so with a little bit of practice, I was able to go and drag the text inwards. So now using the same tool, the path selection tool, I'm going to click on the text and drag it more towards the center of the ellipse. Okay, I have been experiencing a few problems, so here's what I'm going to do to just help myself out. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the type tool and I'm going to highlight the text that I just wrote where it says Wickedly Good Coffee, and I'm going to highlight it, and then I'm going to open up my character panel again, and I'm going to make the text smaller so I can create what's called hierarchy. So I want people to look at the name of the coffee, Bad Witch Brew, first. So I'm going to set my subheading here to a smaller point size. I'm going to set it to 40 points. You guys will, of course, be setting it to whatever you want based on the font you have selected and how small or how big you want it. And I can see that all the letter forms are really, really squished together, right? So I'm going to distance them by adjusting what's called the leading. You can find the leading right over here in the character panel. It looks like a VA with an arrow pointing under it, and if I drag my mouse over the icon for the tracking, I'll be able to space out those letter forms. So I got it to where I want it to go, and now I'm just going to kind of shift this text in place using my free transform tool. I'm going to select that type layer where it says Wickedly Good Coffee, and then using edit and free transform, I'm just going to rotate it just a little bit until it's where I want it to be in the logo. Remember to press enter when you like your results. So the hard part is over. Seriously, the hardest part was the text, 100%. So we're almost done with it. Now we're going to go and start adding the image that we want to use in our design. So I took a lovely selfie wearing my witch hat earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and open it. Here's the ridiculous selfie I took this morning. I am going to select it now using my quick selection tool, and in the options bar I'm going to click select subject so that Photoshop does the work for me of selecting the subject, in this case me. Now that Photoshop created the selection, I'm going to split my screen by going to Window, Arrange, and Tile Vertically. And I'm going to use my Move tool so I can click on the selection and drag it over to my logo in progress. I'm done dragging my selection over, so I'm going to X out of the picture and click No, I don't want to save any changes. And now with my logo in progress, you see the selection has been added, but the image is actually quite big, so I'm going to resize it using free transform. So I'm gonna go to, in fact, before I use free transform, I actually want to go and drag that picture to the top, very top of my layers panel so that I can see what I'm working with. So all I did was click on it and drag it all the way to the top of my layers panel, and now I'm going to use the edit menu and free transform, and I'm going to drag on the corners of the image to resize it and make it small enough that it will fit inside of this black ellipse in my design so far. And I'm going to press enter to save my changes. Okay, now I'm going to show you guys a really cool trick, because as you can see, the picture goes past the ellipse and that looks really sloppy. So I want to be able to crop out anything outside of the ellipse. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control in my keyboard, and I'm going to click on the black circle thumbnail. This is a thumbnail, by the way, in the layers panel. And when I do that, when I click Control and click on the thumbnail simultaneously, you'll see a selection of that layer being made. So in this case, you'll see a selection of the ellipse. I'm gonna reverse it. Notice what layer I'm on, by the way. I'm still on the picture layer. I'm gonna reverse that selection by going to the select menu and inverse, so that now the selection is everywhere else but the inside of the photo. And I'm gonna press down delete, and you'll see that now the image will have cropped beautifully so that I no longer have to deal with the image going past the ellipse. I'm going to press Ctrl D to get rid of that selection. So that was a pretty cool trick. I realized that earlier I forgot to add a white stroke around this ellipse. So I'm going to go back to the black circle layer and I'm going to click on my ellipse tool. Then I'm going to add a stroke of white and I'm going to make it roughly about 20 pixels. Maybe a little thicker. Let me actually go with maybe like 30 pixels, but you guys can make it as thick or as thin as you want it to be. Okay, so 30 pixels looks a lot better, and I really like how it looks so far. My last step here will be basically to apply some adjustments to the image so I can make the image black and white, and I want it to make it look a little bit more like hand-drawn. So I'm going to apply a filter to that image. So I can see right now the layer is called layer 1, so I'm just going to call it Beautiful Witch, because Lord knows I'm a beautiful witch. And what I'm going to do with the Beautiful Witch layer is I'm going to apply an adjustment to it destructively. So I'm going to select that layer, go to the image menu at the top of my workspace, select adjustments and black and white. That's the first thing I'm going to do. So I'm going to convert the image to black and white and I'm going to click OK. And then I will actually, let me fix this little issue here because it went past the stroke and I don't want it to do that. Okay, that's a lot better. I am going to then go to my filter menu and I'm going to select filter gallery. I wanted to have like more of a hand-drawn aesthetic. So I'm going to select under sketch. And under sketch, there is a filter called graphic pen. So I'm going to check out what graphic pen looks like. If that doesn't work for me, I'm going to try out some of the other filters until I can make the image look a little bit more hand-drawn. So I encourage you guys to check out some of the filters in the filter gallery because they all make really interesting hand-drawn kind of effects. So let me try the poster edges filter. There's a lot of different filters, and with any of these filters, so I selected the poster edges filter, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and increase the intensity of it so it looks more hand-drawn and less like a photograph. And you guys can edit the settings for any of these filters. And once I'm happy with how that looks, I'm going to press OK to save my changes. So we are almost done. In my previous example, I had added 2 ellipses over here to just kind of go and separate the 2 parts of my text. So I'm going to do that again. I'm just going to go and drag out some small white ellipses. So I'm going to go and change the color to white with a stroke of none. And I'm going to drag out some really, really tiny ellipses here to make the logo look a little bit more professional. And having dragged out that very small ellipse, I'm just going to make a duplicate of it by holding down Alt and dragging. And I'm going to position it on the other side. This is purely just me being extra, by the way. If you guys don't care to add this, you don't have to, but I feel like that makes the design look a lot more professional. And now what I want to do is I want to get rid of that white background. I want it to have a transparent background so that when I export this in PNG format, it preserves the transparency. And when I apply this logo over any other graphic, I don't see a horrible white background. So in the layers panel, I'm going to go and make that background invisible. That's all you got to do. Basically click that layer icon to toggle the visibility. Just click on the little eyeball next to the layer, and remember that the checkerboard pattern is how Photoshop denotes transparency. So what I'm going to do now is basically export my final draft in PNG format. So I'm going to go to File, Export, and Export As. Now that my export panel loaded, I'm going to make sure the format is set to PNG, and I'm going to make sure that it preserves the transparent background by having this option that says transparency checked off. If it's not checked off, Photoshop will insert a random white background behind your graphic, and you don't want that to do it. I am going to click export and save it to my flash drive. So I hope that's been helpful to you guys. I can't wait to see your own designs, and I know you guys are going to make me proud with your Starbucks logo parodies. Hit me up if you have any questions.